Let's talk about this Big 12 race going into the 2024 season with Matthew Postins. He covers the Big 12 for Heartland College Sports and joins us now on Sons of UCF Live. Matthew, welcome in.
Hey, guys. Nice to meet you. How you doing?
Doing well. Nothing screams Heartland quite like Orlando, Florida, and UCF. How does that fit into your whole name of your site?
Well, I know our owner, Pete Mundo, wanted something that wasn't necessarily conference specific. We actually kind of talked about this a little bit when Texas and Oklahoma announced they were leaving a few years ago, because we were still Heartland College Sports at the time. And we were all kind of like, well, if the Big 12 goes away, what do we call ourselves? And Pete's like, well, we'll stick with the name because even if the Big 12 breaks up, we might still cover these teams. So we picked something that, kind of evokes the heartland of the country, which is where the majority of the conference is right now. And it's also something that's, consistent for the folks who come to our site. And we don't have to change the name of the site if, say, it becomes the All-State Big 12 or the whatever Big 12, or they bring in $1 billion in private equity. We can keep our name.
Yeah, I like that. You all have been bullish on UCF. You like their chances in this wide open Big 12 this year.
Yeah, I feel like offensively, I heard you guys talking in the background for a few minutes. Offensively, I think they're fine. I mean, they've got everything they need from the standpoint of being able to keep up with any team in this conference from an offensive standpoint, especially when you consider they're so good at running the ball. This conference has kind of done a pivot over the past half dozen years from being a conference that was really about the air raid to being a conference where more teams are more balanced offensively. I talked to Matt Campbell about that in media days, and he said for them, it was really about we needed to find a way to shorten the game. So we needed to run the football more. So that's why they started running a lot more 12 and 13 personnel, 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends. And that's filtered over to Oklahoma State. Texas Tech is running the ball more, even though they're running parts of the air raid, they're running the ball effectively more often. And that's, bringing guys like Ollie Gordon and Taj Brooks a lot of attention. So when you have a guy like RJ Harvey who can run the ball, and you bring in KJ Jefferson, who is known for running the football out of the quarterback position, you've got consistency up front. You've got a lot of talent out on the side with the wide receivers. Defenses don't quite know what to do with that. And that's going to make you guys a really hard team to deal with as you get into conference play the second time around.
Matthew, what's the impression conference-wide of Gus Malzahn? Obviously, a ton of success at his time. Well, I mean, a ton. He had success in his time at Auburn. Up and down so far at UCF. What's the I guess the overall vibe about Gus Malzahn from a coaching perspective in the Big 12?
I think the coaches in the conference, they respect him a great deal. They know what he did, not just as the head coach at Auburn, but as the offensive coordinator there when they won the national championship. He's a guy who has kind of evolved over time. He was an air raid guy for a long time, even back in high school in Arkansas. And now he's, integrated the run game into those air raid principles. And you saw Dion at media days. Dion loves the guy. Gus was obviously recruiting his kid coming out of high school, and they've maintained that relationship. But when I talk to other coaches about Gus, there's a lot of respect there. Many of them have crossed paths with him over the years, whether it be longtime coaches having recruited some of his kids when he was coaching high school ball to when he was working his way up as an assistant and as a head coach at Arkansas State. So a lot of respect for him in the conference, from what I can tell from the other head coaches.
I'm going to assume if you think UCF offense will be fine, that you suspect their Achilles heel may be this defense. UCF brings in a guy in Ted Roof, who you might know a little bit from, again, covering the conference. What do you kind of expect or make of a Ted Roof-led UCF defense?
Well, I think, I would hope they're going to be better against the run. I mean, first of all, the Knights, unfortunately, were 122nd in the country in rushing yards.
Details, Matt.
Matthew, you had a 100-yard game against him in week 5.
Details.
The good news is 25th in passing yards, but everybody knew you couldn't stop the run. So I don't know how you stopped Oklahoma State, but, kudos to you for that one game. I think his first goal is to come in and bolster the run defense. And I think that's where a lot of the transfers come in. They brought in a lot of guys from the portal who I think can come in and execute the defense the way he wants it. They want to, plug up the middle. They want to, stop allowing those big plays in the run game. And then from there, I think he wants the defense to be more aggressive. The defenses that I've seen him run, here in the Big 12 and outside the Big 12 is, get out there, be aggressive, create turnovers, get your offense a couple of extra possessions, and because of how good UCF's offense could be, one turnover might be all they need to really kind of turn the game in their direction. So I would expect this defense to be better against the run. And if they're going to contend in the conference, I would expect them to be creating a lot more turnovers on the defensive side.
High-profile non-conference game in the league, and Knight fans have all eyes on Gainesville for the matchup against the Gators. I sometimes feel like I'm a lone voice in the wilderness, where I'm very concerned about traveling to Fort Worth and playing TCU in the Big 12 opener. Tell me I'm wrong here, or back me up. What do you make of TCU, especially in that conference opener in Fort Worth?
It's interesting because they came out last year and they had Colorado in their opener, and that game turned into a complete shootout. And by the end of the season, both teams were under 500. And I don't think anybody in Fort Worth was really able to kind of make heads or tails of the kind of team that they ended up being. Sonny Dykes has talked locally about the fact that so many things that he wasn't expecting to happen last year happened, and that he had a lot of guys who maybe we're off task to some degree within the program. I think those guys have moved on for the most part. I think they feel good about their quarterback position this time around. I think they feel very good about the transfer guys they brought in, and they've made adjustments on both sides of the ball in terms of, especially in defense, tweaking some of the formations that they've been using for a long time. I mean, they've continued to use that Gary Patterson defense even after Gary left, and they're not using that anymore. So they've made a lot of adjustments on the defensive side, I think, to help do a better job of slowing teams down and limiting the big plays that really were kind of their Achilles heel on the defensive side last year. I expect them to be a 500 or better team. I don't know if they'll be that kind of team when you guys see them in week 2, because I feel like there are enough pieces on their team that are still trying to come together that they might be a team that becomes better in the second half of the season as opposed to where they might be in September.
Well, on that note, then, team maybe better in the first half was Colorado. Started out strong a year ago. What do you make? You buying or selling on Coach Prime and Colorado? The Buffs come to Orlando following that TCU game.
Yeah, I think this is a really big season for him because of all the turnover they had when he came in, and then they had a bunch of turnover after that. I'm all for kids having an opportunity to move on if it isn't working for them. But the amount of turnover that they've had at Colorado the last 2 years, I don't think it's conducive to building a program. I think it's good to tap into the portal and, plug holes that you're having issues with, like UCF did with their defense. But to have the massive amount of turnover they've had the past 2 years, I don't know how that's conducive to building a program. And I think that's what he wants to build there. I think we're going to find out a lot more about that this year, because he'll be working with guys that his stars will have been there 2 years. They will have been in his system for 2 years. He's got, I think he's got the coordinators he finally wants within his coaching staff. But for them, it's all about the offensive and the defensive line. That's where they struggled last year. If they struggle there this year, they're going to have another rough season.
2 other road games this year, Matthew. Iowa State and West Virginia. Which one of those 2 would you be more concerned about if you were UCF?
When are both? Oh, I can look at the schedule. Never mind.
Iowa State's earlier. West Virginia comes after Thanksgiving.
I think I'd be a little bit more concerned about Iowa State, just because I've been to both stadiums. I've experienced both environments. I think Iowa State's a little bit more amped up. I think that'll probably be given it's an October game, mid-October, that'll probably be like a mid-afternoon game. That's great tailgating in Ames. They'll be geared up for that game. I know there's been a lot of byplay between the 2 fan bases on Twitter over the past year and a half. So I think Ames is a slightly harder environment to play in than Morgantown. Although if you get snow in Morgantown in late November, that's going to be it's going to be a really interesting game for you guys.
One of the new schools, obviously Arizona, it's hard to know what to make of them, right? They had a coaching change. Our friend Brett Brennan is there now, but they still have some talent, on the team. What do you make of this Arizona team? I can't figure out should I be concerned about them, or do we think there'll be some drop off with the coaching change after Jed Fish leaves?
I think there'll be a little bit of drop off, but I don't think it's going to be significant because they've got consistency at their key positions: quarterback, wide receiver, offensive line, and linebacker. They've got really good players at all four of those positions, and some great consistency left over from when Jed Fish left for Washington. I feel like they've got one of the bigger games in September in terms of conference play because they've got to go to Utah at the end of September. And, that's a big game for both of those schools because Utah will be coming off their conference opener against Oklahoma State in Stillwater. Those are two big games for Utah because they've got a really favorable schedule, frankly, in conference. And those two games are probably their litmus test games. If Utah is going to be a true contender in this conference, I feel like they've got to win both of those games. But for Arizona, if they can go into Utah, steal one, come back home, I think it puts them in favorable position to be a contender. I think one of the things I love about this conference is that we've really got about a half dozen teams that I think are legitimate contenders. And then we've got two or three teams where if everything goes right and they get a couple of breaks, they could be in Arlington at the title game in December. That's what I love about this conference. It's so wide open. You look at the other conferences, you look at two or three clear schools that will probably make it to the title game, and you don't really see anybody that can crash the party. There's half the conference could crash the title game this year. It's really going to be a lot of fun down the stretch.
Only two opponents on UCF schedule did it play a year ago. Three of the four newcomers come to Orlando. You mentioned Utah. That's a Black Friday primetime game on Fox. How big are you on Utah? Do you have them in a conference title game?
Yeah, I think they have everything they need coming into this season. They've got their quarterback back. They've got their tight end back. They've got a lot of talent in their backfield, offensive line. Their defense is in really good shape. I think they probably would have won the Pac-12 last year had they not lost Cam Rising to start the season. That was their biggest problem last year. They didn't always have the consistent quarterback play that they needed. So you bring him back. You give them a favorable schedule where they don't have to play Kansas State. I think their toughest game after those first two is probably at Iowa State, just because it's a road game. Depending upon where you guys are at the end of the season, that could be a really tough game for them. But I just feel like they have everything they need. And while I don't think it's like Utah and everybody else, I think it's like closer like this. I do feel like they're one of those two or three teams that, to me, along with Kansas State and Oklahoma State, I could easily see make it to the title game in December.
And who's the other team you have them playing? Is it Kansas State? Is it Oklahoma State? Somebody that we're not talking about, perhaps?
In my mind, it's Kansas State. They've been incredibly consistent, year to year under Chris Kleeman. I think Avery Johnson is going to have a fantastic year at quarterback. I think obviously he showed his skills as a runner. I think he's made great strides this offseason as a passer. He's got all the weapons he needs around him. They got some question marks up front on the offensive line, losing Cooper Beebe to the NFL. But I think they're the team, they've got talent at key positions. They've got a quarterback who's growing into the role who I think can be a top tier quarterback in this conference. And like Utah, they've got a pretty favorable schedule, frankly, as we go through conference play. They'll have to play Iowa State to end the season. That's a big game for them. But, they're the team that right now, in my mind, I have pegged to play Utah and Arlington.
Matt, where do you rank KJ Jefferson among Big 12 quarterbacks?
I think given his experience and given what he did at Arkansas, I think he's on that second tier. I think he's landed in the right place. If I were to send him to any Big 12 school, if he was transferring out of Arkansas, I would have sent him to UCF because I think he's got the skill set that Gus loves at quarterback. I think he's a better passer than people give him credit for being honest. I think he's much more accurate. I think he has the ability to make things happen on the run that other quarterbacks can't make. I just don't think that the system necessarily at Arkansas allowed him to fully leverage what he can do. And I think Gus is going to be able to do that within this year. And I think because of RJ Harvey and what they can do with the running game, I think that's going to take more pressure off of him. So he may not put up like explosive numbers, but I think KJ has the potential, to be a top 6 quarterback in this conference this year.
Well, you mentioned RJ Harvey. I'm going to give you a layup here so you can make some friends with UCF fans. Where do you rank RJ Harvey in the Big 12 running back hierarchy?
Boy, I'd put him probably probably put him third behind Gordon and Brooks. I think, when I watched RJ on TV last year, I didn't get out there for a game, but he impressed me with his ability to hit the hole and go. He really had a good sense of where the right hole was going to be to get him to move up the field. I thought he was a really powerful runner who could break tackles. I thought he showed some good shiftiness that I think NFL scouts are going to like once he gets to that point. I just feel like he's got a really good, well-rounded game. And I think that serves you well when you've got a quarterback who can run Gus's offense the way he wants it run. And you can toggle between having KJ run the football, having RJ run the football. I think because of that multiple skill set that KJ has, I think it's actually going to open up the door for RJ to have maybe some bigger carries this year, just because defenses are going to be really focused on so many different things in that offense. It's going to leave him in situations where he's going to get the ball and maybe there's only going to be 5 players in the box, and the offensive line is just going to have their way with whoever's there.
We're talking a lot about offense. Defense wins championships. Let's talk about that a little bit. Best defenses in this league that you expect to be consistent over the course of the season.
Oh, gosh. Iowa State's always very solid. John Heacock does a tremendous job there working with whatever he has to create a defense that can win a championship. Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy's really embraced defense over the past 3 or 4 years. I mean, in a way in which he just didn't before. Even after they lost Jim Knowles to Ohio State, they've been able to build a consistent high-level defense that can create turnovers, that can stop the run, and can really limit the passing game. And that's part of the reason why they've been able to go to the Big 12 title game 2 of the last 3 years, because they've really invested more of their time, energy, and recruiting in the defensive side of the football. I really think that Arizona has the ability to be a really good defense this year in this conference. And I wouldn't rule out West Virginia having a really good defense this year. They had kind of an under the radar defense last year where I don't think a lot of people were paying attention to how good it was. Neil Brown has some really good players coming back. He's also got some good transfers coming in, especially in the secondary, to kind of fill out spots where he lost players to the NFL. I think they could be a really good under the radar defense that maybe folks won't be paying attention to, but could be like a top 30, top 40 defense in the country.
You mentioned Matt Campbell, the Iowa State coach, earlier. Have you met a guy with a better tan than Matt Campbell?
No, I haven't. And as far as I know, he doesn't sun. I mean, he's had that complexion since he's been in the conference. It's crazy. I don't know what he's doing, but it's working for him. It's just, he's one of the most consistent coaches in this conference. I mean, you go to media day, he's always going to kind of say the same things, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. He's not terribly controversial. He always has his players' backs, but everything that he does within his program, he's built it in a way that's mindful, that's there to help develop players. You see it with Brock Purdy every Sunday with the 49ers. And there are a lot of other Iowa State players that he's coached over the past, half dozen years that are in the league now. Breece Hall with the Jets. They've all kind of embraced his culture. They've all embraced how they develop players there. And it's part of the reason why they're, consistently good year after year in this conference, and why they're a team that I feel like, has the potential to get to Arlington this year for the title game.
How many coaches would you put on a hot seat? Dave Aranda comes to mind in Baylor. There's some squawk there that a fan base is getting a little frustrated. Who else might you consider on a hot seat?
I'm not certain there's anybody truly on a hot seat in this conference, except maybe go back to Neil Brown. And I know that sounds like a broken record, but he got a 1 year.
Is he just the easy name to mention year in and year out?
He got a 1 year extension after the bowl win, but he took a pay cut to do it. And that's just really unusual to me. Usually you win a bowl game in that situation, maybe you get a 1 year extension, but you get a raise. He took a pay cut, which I just thought was really odd and unusual. You don't see it very often. It kind of sent a message to me like, yeah, you earned another year, but maybe you haven't earned anything beyond that. So that's kind of why I feel like West Virginia has to have another good year for Neil Brown to not just get a 1 year extension, but to get like a 2 or 3 year extension and get a raise.
And a raise.
And a raise, exactly. Get some of that money back. And I don't see anybody else in the conference who's really sitting on a hot seat right now, because you have a lot of new coaches in the conference, both to their jobs and to the conference. The coaches that are here really haven't shown an interest in going anywhere else. Gundy, Campbell, those coaches. I think it's probably more likely that a coach gets lured away to a quote unquote bigger job than it is for anybody outside of Aranda or Brown to get fired. I can see in the chat Satterfield. He's been there. This is his second year at Cincinnati. Last year didn't go well. They turned over, I think, like 30 something players in the transfer portal this year. They need a quarterback, and they're battling that out right now in camp. And I think he probably gets one more year at least, unless they just have a really epically bad season in Cincinnati this year, which I don't think is that likely. But I have a hard time seeing them get to 500. But I think given the investment Cincinnati's made in him, I don't think they would cut bait after 2 years.
As much fun as it is to talk about football, basketball will be here before we know it. How much fun is this league going to be? A 20-game schedule now.
Yeah, that's my beat here at Heartland. So I think it's going to be an absolutely fantastic race. I mean, Arizona obviously brings something to the table. Colorado has been a really good team the last few years. The only one of those four new teams that are coming in that I kind of have some concerns about is Utah, just because they've been kind of average the last few years. Even Arizona State, I know they weren't that good last year, but Bobby Hurley has done such a fantastic job in the transfer portal this year that I think Arizona State could actually have a bounce back year. And then, Houston, Kansas, Iowa State, TJ Otzelberger's building a monster there in Ames. I thought Johnny Dawkins did a really good job in the portal.
I was waiting for you to mention UCF and all the new guys.
Yeah, he did a really good job, I thought, in the portal this year in terms of getting some talent that can help him now, and also grabbing a couple of guys who still have multiple years of eligibility that he can build with and build up that program. There are no weak teams in this conference, honestly. DeVries at West Virginia, I think they'll struggle a little bit this year, but I think eventually he will build something really good there at West Virginia. I mean, it's hard to pick a bad team in that league, a truly bad team. I mean, there will be some teams by the end of the season that are, maybe 6-10, or 6-14, 7-13. But
that sounds funny, doesn't it?
but they won't be bad teams. They'll just be teams that ended up on the losing end of probably 4 or 5 games they could have easily won.
That's why I say if UCF can get to 10-10, that's going to be an accomplishment year over year. Matthew, enjoyed talking Big 12 football with you. We'll have to have you back as that basketball season gets closer.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Matthew Postins covers the Big 12 for Heartland College Sports. Thanks for being with us on Sons of UCF Live.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.